Carol for inviting me to this dialogue with Cynthia. I mean, I don't know if you realize how privileged I am to share this dialogue with Cynthia, who has been really influential in my work and has helped me to remain sane in working for a patriarchal organization, and we'll come to that. So thank you, it's always a pleasure to be here, and I know we're going to have a lot of fun while talking about a very serious topic, right? So I don't know also if you realize what it takes to be an activist within the United Nations or a feminist working for peacekeeping operation. Okay, think about it, and maybe can I ask a few questions later. I'm not going to, I need to see you and to see a little bit what's happening in this room. I'm not going to tell you what it is to be a senior gender advisor for peacekeeping operation. First, you can guess or try to understand what kind of responsibilities it entails. But I can answer any questions if you want to know more about what it means when you're a gender advisor working for peacekeeping operation in the field. What I want to do today is to really try to see how in the field of peacekeeping operation we are approaching issues such as security and protection. Why those two topics? Because I think it has major implications on the ground, because we are mainly defining security according to the masculine norm of reference, to start with. My second point is that more and more peacekeeping operations do have a mandate to protect civilians, whatever it means, and I will go into details, try to give you a little bit of concrete examples. So I would like to link this notion of security, what it means for women in peacekeeping context. You know, we have today more than 10 peacekeeping operations all over the world, but I'm focusing only on the 9 peacekeeping missions that have a gender advisor and that have a mandate to protect civilians, right? And I'm talking about Haiti, South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, as an example. So if we, Carol, can you keep the time, because I can talk beyond people. So if we focus on the definition of security, and I know Cynthia has a lot to say about it, right? I would like to ask you 2 questions. We're talking about security for whom, and who defines security? So you have the context, peacekeeping environment. We're talking about security issues. What does it mean? Security for whom, and who defines security? Very often, my experience I've seen is that security is referring to militarized security, especially in the context of peacekeeping operation. And we forget, and when I say we, it's not me personally, it's the institution I represent, right? Okay, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying, it's not me all the time. So we somehow don't look into the different perception of women and men in the host country where peacekeeping operations are deployed, right? If I take an example, Sierra Leone, for instance, is generally classified as a post-conflict environment, right? But most women in that country do not consider themselves to be living in peace, right? And if you ask the woman, they would list under insecurity high rates of poverty and violence, for instance, including domestic violence. So you see that we start to see a little bit the difference how women would approach concept of security compared to the men, and I will come back to that later. In Afghanistan, one woman would say, for instance, we are not talking about a big war, but peace for us also means no domestic violence. So, in peacekeeping operation, there is a strong assumption that the way women experience insecurity is no different from the way men do, right? And very often, men associate peace with what? The absence of formal conflict, the cessation of hostilities, the stability of formal structure and power, such as governance and infrastructure. So you see a little bit the difference when you have always keep your gender lenses and you start to deconstruct the reality and you see that it's different for men and women. Let me give you my first concrete example. In Haiti, 2007-2008, there was a big disarmament of gangs in the slums by the peacekeepers. The operation was successful, according to the masculine norm of reference again, and security was prevailing back in the slums. But security for whom? Again, what about the women? They still had to collect water at the water point, situated far away from home, for example. And of course, for them, this had security implications, right? Then, once the young male gang members were disarmed, they were somehow empowered again. How? Because they were given jobs within the community in the framework of what we call the Community Violence Reduction Program. And again, Carol didn't mention that, but one of my obsessions is language. So pay attention to language and really try to listen carefully when we are talking about the experience of men and women in security, and try to understand that we are not talking about the same thing from the same angle. So if we're talking about Community Violence Reduction Program, it's not that obvious for everybody that we are really going to reduce the violence within the community, all right? One also, a big issue we have when we're talking about security and peacekeeping is that a lack of assessment of the situation on the ground prevent us from really understanding what security means. And for me, the most important thing to highlight is that there is a real lack of sex and age disaggregated data. So if we don't, and that's, I'm turning to Cynthia because she's the one who highlighted this for me, is that of course, if you don't have data from the field, and you don't know exactly what are the reality of the men and the women, you don't have sex and age disaggregated data, then you don't have a clear understanding of what's going on in the field. And if you can't identify the real issues, you don't need to address them, right? So I think you have, again, to be a little bit curious about what's going on in the field. And if I may quote you, Cynthia, when you said, and curiosity is a political act, right? Because decision makers don't want always to see the reality, because then you have to address the problem. And maybe you don't want to address them for political reasons, or because you don't have the resources, or because you have to think differently. So it's easier, I think, to continue to work according to the masculine norm of preference, instead of addressing the real issues on the ground. And something that you realize also, why are we so quick at trying to disarm the young men in gangs? Why are we so investing so much in the disarmament and demobilization program, but focusing mainly on men? Here again, the lesson I learned from Cynthia, it's because insecurity that is male on male, remember that? For instance, the armed militias of the gang fighting on each other. This violence is more detrimental to political stability and stable government than the violence from men to women. So, I hope I understand my French also, right? You will check that at the beginning. So here again, the insecurity that is male on male is seen more detrimental to political stability of post-conflict society than the violence that is committed by men on women. That's why decision makers are so focused on disarming young men from the main gangs, right? So I'm just flagging a few issues, and then we can continue the discussion a little bit later. Now, what I want to highlight is on this issue of protection of civilians linked to the, of course, this context of how to define security, right? More and more, we have a mandate in peacekeeping operations, civilian protection of civilian mandate. What does it entail? It means that we are trying to have a three-pronged approach to the protection of civilians. The first one is what we call protection through political process. The second one is providing protection from physical violence. And the third one is establishing a protective environment. So let me quickly give you a little bit of example of what it means. The first one, protection through political process. Protection is not only physical protection, as we understand, right? So we think that if we can facilitate political and peace processes and promote the participation of women to peace negotiation, mediation, conflict resolution, maybe we can better protect women. Meaning that if women can manage to reach decision-making level, be part of peace processes and political processes, they can then move into government, parliament, change the laws discriminatory to women, and somehow this has an effect on how women see their own security and protection within society. The second one that peacekeepers are doing is the providing protection from physical violence. This means patrolling, especially for talking about military peacekeepers, ensuring freedom of movement, road security for refugees, IDPs, early warning measures. The third one, establishing a protective environment, is mainly the promotion of legal protection, facilitation of humanitarian assistance, and advocacy and support to national institutions. So try to keep in mind this mandate to protect civilians is very broad, it's very vague, it's focusing on a three-tiered approach to the protection of civilians. I'm not sure it works. Just leave it open like that, and I want to give you a concrete example of what it means, this protection approach, when we're talking about conflict-related sexual violence. I use this example because they're pretty concrete and action-oriented. And again, I'm telling you what we're doing at the UN, right? So you can agree, disagree, I'll be happy to hear what you have to say. It's not my position at all. My position is a little bit different, but we can deconstruct together, right? So, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, if you take one of the concrete examples, the peacekeeping operation is trying to really fight against issues relating to sexual violence. And you know, we have, beyond the resolution 1315 on women, peace and security, we have now more resolutions, some of them focusing mainly on sexual violence. So the peacekeepers, the decision makers in peacekeeping operation came with some ideas to protect women and girls from sexual violence, right? And I'm going to give you a few examples, and you will tell me if you think it's great, it's gonna really protect women and girls, and we're gonna stop violence against women in the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you think it's a little bit shortcoming, right? The first one, again, the preventive physical patrol, and this is the peacekeepers are trying to tailor protection to women's mobility patterns. What I mean is that they will organize, for instance, firewood patrols, water road patrols, and market escorts. As you know, in some countries, women are really in charge of collecting water and wood, and very often they have to walk for long hours, get outside the refugee camps or the IDP camps to collect water and wood, and this put them in sometimes difficult situations, especially that it would be a good idea to patrol along those roads and accompany the women to collect the firewood or the water. For instance, what they did in one particular place in the Congo, they decided to seal off a market entrance for the duration of the women's trade, so that there would be what they call a weapon-free zone in which the woman could work safely. So you understand the example, right? You can picture the peacekeepers securing the perimeter of the market and preventing any armed groups to jeopardize the trade that the women were carrying. Now, of course, this solution has some limitations that you may see. I don't think it's really sustainable, and many patrols can be a little bit intimidating for women. What do you think? I mean, men in arms, even if they are wearing a blue helmet in conflict or post-conflict environment, where women have been victims of abuses by armed men in uniform. I don't know, it's a question I'm asking you. Do you think it's a good solution? Again, sometimes I think that we are taking, at peacekeeping, we have a lot of ad hoc solutions, very short-term solutions, but we don't really tackle the root cause of sexual violence. But it's a huge problem, right? And tackling the root cause maybe has more implications because you have to then start working about the mentalities, the culture, the traditions that allow perpetrate violence against women. But that's one example of what peacekeepers are trained to do, and I'm talking the physical patrols. Then what they're doing also is what we call the substitution efforts. And I give you the example of the provision of fuel-efficient stove, which reduces the needs for women to venture beyond the camp perimeter to collect the firewood. These fuel-efficient stoves were also introduced by the Red Cross when I was working for the Red Cross. It was a very interesting idea that the Red Cross workers who had decided to introduce the fuel-efficient stove thought of that project from a protection angle, right? We don't want the women to get raped when they go outside the perimeter of the camps to collect the firewood, so we're going to provide them with fuel-efficient stoves so they won't have to go very often outside the camp, right? They can go once in a while, collect enough wood, and then this will reduce the exposure to violence. But they did that without really consulting the women themselves. And that's also a very, very important topic, consulting the people you're working with in the peacekeeping environment. So what happened? The women were very happy to receive the fuel-efficient stoves, but they continued to go outside the camp as often as possible. Why? Because they saw in that collection of firewood an economic opportunity, that they could sell the firewood they didn't need to use with the fuel-efficient stoves. They sold the wood, made a little bit of an income, and this nobody had anticipated that it would turn into a kind of economic project and it wouldn't stick into the protection project, right? So, again, maybe if we had consulted the women themselves, they would have said, well, yeah, thank you for the fuel-efficient stove, but we still want to collect the wood and sell it to the market. So, and find a solution with them that would be maybe more sustainable, right? So that's a little bit of a shortcoming of all the solutions we're trying to promote on this issue of protection. Now, one of my favorite subjects is working with communities. So that's another solution that peacekeepers are trying to promote, is working with communities to enable them to raise the alarm in the face of emergency threats. Let's say if there is some rebel groups, armed groups in the area, the community will alert the peacekeepers who will intervene and protect the community, right? It's brilliant. I mean, it's what they call the village vigilance group or village defense committees. So this activates a kind of quick reaction force to dispatch the peacekeepers in the area in a timely manner. So I think The peacekeepers have distributed radio to community members, mainly men, because of course, who can handle a radio within the community? And I know the peacekeepers in a timely manner, right? So this is an attempt to improve the community liaison strategies between the peacekeepers and the community, right? And more, the peacekeepers are trying to consult also with women's organizations, and not only the usual suspects, I would say, the male elders, who are holding the official and visible within the community. And that's very important because consulting the women can set, really, I think, an example and set the tone for the rest of the community, showing that women as they are valuable contributors, right? And to the consolidation of peace and resolution of conflict, and that they have a voice in the matter of security. And that's very important because very often we do not consult the women at the community level because there is an assumption that they have nothing interesting to contribute as far as security is concerned, right? So another example why the peacekeepers realized that maybe consulting with the men was not enough is that you miss some information because men and women don't follow the same pattern of living in the communities. And for example, some patrols who arrived in the village and were trying to gather information about insecurity couldn't gather anything really relevant because the men were saying, no, it's fine, I mean, we haven't been attacked for a while, so it's rather safe. But if they had talked to the woman, they would have realized that the woman was sleeping in the forest and not in the village because they thought it was safer to be outside the village because the village was still too dangerous. So again, two different perspectives on what is safe, what is not safe, two different perspectives on security and insecurity, right? So there's still a long way to go to ensure that women have a voice in the process of consultation. But I think I don't think we learned a lot of lessons at the UN, but it will take a few security incidents to realize that we could have done a better prevention if we had consulted both men and women at the community level. Then the other strategy that peacekeepers apply is to get more women peacekeepers. So that's a fascinating topic, and I'm not going too much into details now, but there is an assumption again that maybe their presence can serve as a positive role modeling effect for other women. So I don't know what to think about that, but for instance, in Liberia, there is an all-female police unit from India that is integrated within the peacekeeping operation. And it has been documented that the role they play in the peacekeeping was a good incentive for Liberian women to join the police, the national police. We haven't been able to really document this in depth, and my office planned to do a little bit of an evaluation of the role and impact of this all-female police unit in Liberia and Haiti to see if they really make a difference or not. Because I'm wondering, maybe we get more women in the Liberian police, but what are they doing within the police? Are they working at a desk? Are they really patrolling? Do they have the same access to the same responsibilities as the men? So we have to be careful beyond the I would say the rosy picture, of the UN saying that more female peacekeepers can serve as a positive role modeling. That's a question I'm asking you. Now, do you have a little bit more time?
Yeah, 5 more minutes.
5 minutes, right? Okay. So I would like also to share with you some of our thoughts linked to these protection issues and security. We were last week with Carol and Sandra at the Women Peacemakers Conference in San Diego, and it was wonderful to be with all these women peacemakers, talking about how we can challenge patriarchy and we can work more from grassroots. And then we came up with some recommendations for UN peacekeeping, how to better protect women and girls. And I would like to share with you 3 main recommendations because I think they're key if we want to do business a little bit differently. we don't involve and consult with the local actors and leaders enough, right? And that really systematically talk to both the men and the women to develop how to develop local protection mechanisms that are really context and gender aware, right? And there was a strong emphasis on community ownership. Because you see the example I gave you on the, for instance, the physical protection, it's really, I think it's just concrete examples that what we can do in the present moment. But we're not going to seal up the market for the next 10 years, right? And allow the women to do their business safely. I mean, we have to find sustainable solutions, right? And maybe if we involve the local men and women in the search for solution, we find real solutions that are not really driven by external actors. And one woman from Afghanistan gave us a very, very interesting example. In Afghanistan, we found that the schools that were built for girls were repeatedly burned down. All right? So what would an average UN or humanitarian worker do? Build another school. And when the school is burned down, we build another school. But consultation with female and male community members brought the solution of having the boys attending in the morning and the girls attending in the evening. And then the schools were not destroyed. So you see, I found this example, it's just amazing because I would have never thought of that. You know, it's just like, okay, we want to help the women and the girls, so we're going to build schools for the girls to go to schools, right? But then we have the Taliban don't want the girls to go to school, so they're going to burn down the schools. So what if we bring also the boys to the same schools and we alternate? And I found this brilliant because this was the idea that came from the men and the women from the community, right? So that's a recommendation I want to bring back to the UN in New York and see what they have to say about that, because it seems, I think it's kind of a creative way of allowing both the boys and the girls to continue to go to school, right? Then we had another recommendation was to really pay attention to the gender relationship in the local culture and to not expose women to further violence or fail to meet the woman's needs or to draw on their capacities through a gender-blind operation. So what does it mean? Two things. First, in order to consult and work with the woman in many places, it may be necessary to raise awareness of the main leaders to get access to women. At the same time, we should not accept an excuse of culture or traditions to impede women and allow violence towards women to continue. On my point A, to raise awareness of the main leaders, I remember when I was in Haiti, when the male gangs were controlling some neighborhoods and slums, it was impossible to reach out to the women without going through the men in charge. And if we had persisted in wanting to reach out to the women and bypassing or overlooking the authority of the men, this would have really repercussion for the women, and it would put them really in jeopardy within their own community. So the issue was to sit down with the men and explain the activities we wanted to really carry out at the community level, get their approval, and if they were not, they didn't approve, well, try to convince them that it was good for the entire community. So I think sometimes we have to be a little bit careful because we arrive, we deploy a mission, we have all the solutions to all the problems of the local men and women, and we make a lot of mistakes, and we expose women to more violence. At the same time, when I'm saying we don't want to accept cultural traditions as an excuse, it's because I've heard very often trapped into cultural traditions. It's a little bit of a dilemma sometimes, but if we really engage in dialogue with the local men and women at the community level, this community ownership for me is very important, and I think we can bring some great solution. And this is something also we try to do in the Democratic Republic of Congo when we started to tackle the issue of sexual violence. And we had we started to develop what we call the Maison d'écoute, the counseling houses for women victims of rape. And that was for them, for these women could find a safe place to talk about what happened to them and to get recognition of what happened. And they could talk to trained Congolese psychosocial workers. And we use existing structure through women's organization to build up those counseling houses. At the same time, we use Congolese men and women to reach out to the male elders within the community and start talking about sexual violence in a society where you don't talk about sexual violence. And try to ensure to do a little bit of mediation also, ensure that the women who have been raped wouldn't be blamed, wouldn't be ostracized, and would be able to reintegrate their community. It's a long-term investment. It's not something you can do like patrolling and trying to protect the women. It's just investing in the community. And I remember when we started this project, there were a lot of criticism, of course, when you want to start something a little bit innovative. People said, oh, it will never work because we will ostracize the women within the community. Everybody will know that the counseling houses are for women victims of rape. But actually, it was so embedded within the social fabric of the local culture, the local society, that the men and women accepted those listening houses, counseling houses, as really something that can bring comfort to the women who have been victims of sexual violence. And sooner, and very soon, we could see that more and more men and women were visiting those counseling centers not because of issues of sexual violence, but because they were traumatized by the war, or they had been victims of violence in general, torture, and they just wanted to talk about it, right? So another example, I have many others, but maybe when we have the question and answers, I can give you more examples of how there is always a local solution to problems. We may need to reinforce infrastructure or train the people, comfort the people, or assist them to regain the capacity after a war. But I think I see more solution in this dialogue with the local community than bringing some kind of outside solutions that won't be sustainable. And my last point, and I think it's key in the global, I would say, political picture. We need more women in leadership, especially in the UN peacekeeping operations, because each peacekeeping operation is managed, led by a special representative of the Secretary General, right? And most of them are men. Okay? So what's my point? And most of the deputy are men. And nobody's questioning that. So I think that the path to getting more women in leadership includes changing the job experience requirements. And this goes also with having a different approach to security and protection, right? From not according to the masculine normal preference, but from maybe some women's perspective. And I was really, it was an eye-opener for me, this Women Peacemakers Conference, because I was just watching in the room all these great women with years of experience, working at the grassroots levels, doing mediation, conflict resolution. And I was thinking of my colleagues in New York said, oh, we cannot find competent women to go to the field and be the head of a peacekeeping mission. Sorry, we're trying. And I was just like, so there is a problem. The women are there, and we keep saying we don't find competent women. And then I realized, all of a sudden, I've been so stupid for many years, because the problem lies in the job description of the head of a peacekeeping mission. The current requirements actually is more leading to the men typical career path, but like from a minister, from a diplomat, from an ambassador. So it's not necessarily reflecting the experience that could be useful
Conspiracy has a lot to say for it. It seems breathing together. I've learned so much from Nadine. So what I thought, I'll come at this a little differently, but then really think on just turbulent here. Think about what you want to ask Nadine, right? And make it as hands-on and as gritty as possible, right? You don't get many chances to talk to somebody with Nadine's experience and insight. So, okay, verbal, write down the question, think about what you need. What strikes me in the several times that Nadine and I have talked, informally and formally, and Carol and I, and Sandy and I, and Jane and Katya, is that you shouldn't be able to come out of any undergraduate or graduate program today without having the capacity to do gender analysis. You should not be able to come, I don't care what the program's called. I don't care whether it's an English major or it's global governance or it's especially if it's engineering. Oh my God. None of us should be. I came out of Berkeley, this was Berkeley when Berkeley was allegedly radical. It wasn't all that radical. I had never heard the word gender. I certainly had never heard the word feminism, and I certainly had no idea that thinking as a feminist about gender analysis, I could be smarter about the world. Nobody in 1960s Berkeley ever suggested that that was a possibility. So at this point, we cannot operate in this world, I think, unless we have gender analytical skills. And they are real skills. You have to develop them. It's not just about being good. It's not just about being conscientious. It's not just about being well-meaning. I can be well-meaning about my car, and it still doesn't mean I can change the oil, right? To do gender analysis means you actually have to get up to speed on what it means to do gender analysis. And you could hear Nadine doing gender analysis of program after program in UN Peacekeeping. And the Fletcher folks managed to arrive? Okay, Fletcher is the only school I know of. This is the graduate school of law, diplomacy, and everything else that's supposed to equip you for a foreign policy career. The Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University has a terrific group of graduate students. Many are women. Many come to Fletcher and find that there is no gender analysis except, is Diane here? Did Diane make it?
Her kids were not allowing her to.
Oh yeah, that's kids, they have their own politics. Unless you have the chance to take Diane Mazarana's course at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, you will come out of Fletcher and have no gender analytical skills. And worse, you won't know you're missing anything. So, the gender smart graduate students at Fletcher decided to do something that nobody else has ever done, but they should be used as a model. They decided to do a feminist gender analysis. A gender analysis without feminism means you're not really curious enough about power. So, to do a really good gender analysis, which means you're not only interested in masculinity and femininity, you're interested in the workings of power as they shape both, and that both of them shape power, right? So what they decided to do at Fletcher, these really terrific graduate students at Fletcher, they decided, was it 3 years ago now? 3, right? They decided to do a feminist gender analysis of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Oh, you say, right? So is there a gender analysis of UMass Boston? Is there a gender analysis of Wellesley? Is there a gender analysis of my university, Is there a gender analysis of Harvard? Is there a gender analysis of the Sorbonne? Is there a gender analysis of any other program? No, what we tend to do is we tend to think that gender analysis is how we understand them. Those people over there, right? Those people to whom we're going to deliver aid. That we will do a gender analysis of them. But you can't do it unless you've done a gender analysis of yourself. And that means that you have to decide what it is that's gendered. And that's not always obvious. So the Fletcher students, and it took how many were in the group? There were about 6 or 7 to start with. Yeah, and it's up on the web. Talk to, who are the Fletcher people? Raise your hands. There they are. Talk to them afterwards and find out how you can see it's a fabulous, groundbreaking, radical, really troublemaking report. And so what they did is they got together and they thought, okay, so first of all, we have to learn how to count. You know, they always say that feminists don't know how to count. That's not true. We count all the time. All the time. We counted last night during the debates. Didn't we? Right? We count all the time. So they decided, well, the first thing they do is figure out what you could count at Fletcher. So they decided, well, they, of course, count the courses. How many courses at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy have gender in course title? Well, that was easy because it was 1. But it's not just 1, it's 1 of 58, right? Then they decided, well, that's the easy part. Then they decided, well, they would look at what was the proportions of women and men on the faculty. That's kind of obvious, right? But being the really smart gender analysts they are, they knew that people on the faculties have different kinds of ranks and they have different kinds of contracts. Now, when you're a student, hopefully you have not a clue whether the person from whom you're taking the course is an adjunct, is an associate, is a tenure track person, is a visiting. Hopefully you don't know. But in fact, it really matters because it doesn't matter for your education, right, in the classroom, but it matters because it's an indicator of what the administrators of the school take seriously. They take seriously things they put on gender on the tenure track. And they take seriously those people not only on tenure track, but those that are awarded tenure. So they did a gender analysis of the faculty by rank and by contract, which was even more revealing because what they looked at was where is power accorded, and it's accorded to tenured, can't be fired, tenured faculty members. And that's where the masculinization of the Tufts Fletcher School faculty just was in neon. If you had made the mistake and just did a gender analysis of all faculty, it would look bad, but it wouldn't look that bad. Because, of course, women are more disposable. So you hire them for a 1-year this and a 1-year that, and you never consider them for tenure, and you certainly don't ever give them tenure, and it makes Fletcher look better. By the way, you do this with any school. Then they decided, they just got better and better and better, meaning they got more and more curious. So then they started to do an analysis of syllabi. You know, those things that professors work on and hand out, and supposedly they correspond to maybe this, maybe it isn't. And they decided to, Jane and I had conversations, they decided to do a gender analysis of which readings are assigned. Which ones are optional, and which ones are required. And they, again, just all they did is count. Really easy. They just went through and counted what percentage of all required readings were written by men, and what proportion of all required readings were written by women. Graph, you know, picture it. Okay? But they were really great. They went and started to do interviews, because if you're doing gender analysis, you've got to have interviewing skills and you have to have ethnographic skills. So they decided to go talk to faculty members, women and men, a few women there were, and men, to ask them, well, where was gender in their thinking about this topic? And they got some of the most interesting answers. They found that a great number of the men who they asked this question of about their own courses said, well, they didn't want to introduce either the topic of women or the topic of gender, which most of the male faculty members thought were synonymous. They didn't want to introduce, watch this, this is what they said to the good Fletcher interviewers. They didn't want to introduce that because they thought it would make the men in the class uncomfortable. Now, I don't know what you all think education is, but I thought it was about being uncomfortable. I thought that was the point. I mean, if I'm in a class and I'm just totally in my comfort zone, I'm probably not learning anything. So this was a pedagogical caring strategy, not to make the students and perhaps themselves uncomfortable. The other thing is, of course, they said, well, somebody else is doing it. And the somebody else at Fletcher is Diane Mazzarani, who has, of course, the biggest classes at Fletcher. And how many were in your class, Tommy? 85.
100.
Is 100?
Yeah.
This is a graduate course. Yes. And it's only offered one semester, right, one semester a year. And so a lot of faculty members imagine that, well, it's taken care of by the most overworked single faculty member at Fletcher. But of course, the students who did the research also looked at enrollments. And what they also noticed was that this was the largest course. I mean, there was something about need here. There was something about interest. There was something about, well, what kind of skills do I need to be effective in this world of policy making and international agencies and international law? And you could see students making the very smart decision, we need those skills. The Fletcher administration had decided that you didn't need these skills, but these students who are going to go out and try and get jobs and be effective in the jobs knew that you have to have those skills. You cannot operate effectively in the world of international affairs today if you cannot do gender analysis. Then this gets better and better and better. Then they went and looked at the enrollments by gender, men and women, in class by class by class. Which classes, now this depends for those of you who are kind of en franc with what a graduate program in law and diplomacy, international politics would look like. So for those of you who kind of have operated in that strange world, courses with which words in them do you think were the most masculinized? That is, well, I'll expand on this, but which courses do you think have the highest proportion of male to female students who chose to take that course? Security, right? Absolutely, because it was presumed it would not be Nadine's definition of security. This would not be a course on domestic violence. This would be a course on conventional American version of security, which meant militarized security. And so a lot of Fletcher students, not all, imagined that it would also be the most unproblematically, that is, you don't raise any questions about it, unproblematically masculinized version of security. And the other is any course that has strategy in the title. Strategy and security. And These are two terms, by the way. If you did a history of American, British, maybe now Japanese, probably Australian, maybe Canadian, academia, maybe Indian as well now, academia, you would find that the notions of being trained in security and being trained in strategy is really quite late 20th century. This is not courses that you would find listed in catalogs of Yale in 1825. These are new concepts in the history of human thinking. And they have been developed in a highly militarized and masculinized way. I don't mean that the study of security is just for military officers. And I don't mean that it's taught mainly by military officers, although certainly it's taught at all the military academies around the world. But it is presumed that the study of security will not be anything other than an unproblematically, that means you don't ask any questions about it, masculinized and militarized version of security. And therefore, a lot of students wanting to get those skills think that's where they're going to get them. Which courses, again, you have to kind of think what's being offered today, and everything's historicized. We're in history, believe it or not. Which courses, so think about the kind of names courses. Which courses do you think at Fletcher have the highest percentage of women who choose them?
The development.
Development, absolutely. So now you've got the feminization of development and the masculinization of security. Does this make for great policy making? And it's a definition of skill, mind you. It's a definition of skill. So development is imagined to be something that is feminized. And Carol, who's done this fabulous article on how masculinities and femininities are wielded in weapons of mass destruction discourse, will tell you that anything that you can feminize, and you can feminize anything, right? So it's always in history. You have to chart over time. You can feminize anything. Bank tellers used to be masculinized. Right? Walked into any bank recently, right? Bank teller has become totally feminized. At the start, all telephone operators were men, and it's been feminized. So, if you feminize something in a patriarchal culture, meaning a patriarchal university culture, a patriarchal national culture, a patriarchal UN culture, if you feminize anything, the result is that you reduce its status. Anything, this is in patriarchal systems, anything that you can taint with feminization, you can withdraw its status and authority. This is why male political rivals, with not a single woman to be seen, will try to feminize the other. Right? A man talking about peace will be criticized as a wimp or as soft or even sotto voce, a girl, by his political rival, who says you have to talk about security and strategy, the militarized version. So if development in the current world of academia is being imagined to be primarily a feminized field, you immediately then have sucked out of it its seriousness, which of course is devastating. Devastating for development, and devastating for anybody who is trying to make development issues a priority. If you masculinize something in any patriarchal institution, or any patriarchal society or set of societies, if you masculinize it, you accord it seriousness. You bestow on it authority. you raise its status. I told this story before, but it has really just stuck with me so much. I was asked by Suzanne Williams, who started the gender development unit inside of Oxfam based in the international humanitarian organization, and which you don't usually think of as a bastion of patriarchy, Oxfam. But she felt that in fact there was enough gender consciousness about the actual dynamics, not only between men and women, but between masculinized and feminized ideas and projects within Oxfam. So she started the gender development unit, really a caucus, really a deliberate burr under the Oxfam saddle. So several years ago, Suzanne asked if I would come up from London. I was just there for a brief time. Would I take the train up to Oxford and come and do a lunchtime, bag lunch, informal discussion? She said, oh, sure. And I said, oh, sure, because I know nothing about Oxfam. And like all of us, you accept invitations because you're supposed to do the blah, blah, but in fact, you want to know what the hell's going on. So I thought, oh, this is great, okay. So, and the room was packed, and Suzanne was just amazed. She didn't think anybody would come to have this conversation. But people brought their sandwiches, and people sat on the windowsills. It was both men and women in the Oxfam headquarters, all of whom had spent time in what's euphemistically called a field, which always means a place you don't consider your home. And so it was a really good, it was high energy, low quality lunch. And it was a room with a blackboard. They obviously had trainings there. So after I talked a little bit, I said, so look, I don't know anything about Oxfam. I mean, I'm an admirer of it, but I don't really know how you guys work. I said, so tell me, what's the most masculinized part of Oxfam? Now this is Oxfam. This is not the U.S. Defense Department. It's not even UNPKR. I said, so what is the most masculinized part of Oxfam? And it's great. So they put down their languages. They started whispering to each other because they were trying to figure it out. And so finally a couple of hands went up, and one guy said, the water boys. And everyone else said, oh, absolutely, the water boys, absolutely. What they meant was Oxfam supplies, this is one of its great humanitarian aid functions. It supplies clean water in emergency situations, which means it brings in pipes. It means that you have to know about water supply. You have to know about technical things, and you have to be able to lift the pipes. And what they said was, oh yes, the water guys are the ones who are almost all male, but also it's considered kind of a guy's thing within Oxfam. Now you have to remember what the range of masculinity is within Oxfam, right? I mean, this is not the Green Berets, right? So already Oxfam masculinity is really quite different than the perhaps, special forces, Delta Force masculinity. Not within Oxfam, it was considered the most manly of humanitarian aid jobs. I said, what is the consequence of it being, and this was, it's not written down anywhere, kind of just generally thought of as the most manly thing that Oxfam does. And they said, oh, the women raised their hand immediately and said, oh, well, of course they always get Land Rovers. That is, their job is considered urgent. Their job is considered serious. Their job is considered technically demanding. That is, Oxfam doesn't have a lot of resources, but getting the Land Rover, that's big. And the second thing they said is, well, and also, because of course then these are really smart people, so they began sort of thinking it through, and they said, well, the other thing is that when we come to a refugee camp and have to set up the water pipes, we are a believer, this is Oxfam, we are a believer in community participation. So we get people in the refugee camps to take part. Who in the refugee camps do you think they ask to help out with the laying and learning how to deliver water? The refugee guys. So Oxfam's very intervention in the name of desperately needed humanitarian aid in the form of clean water immediately starts deepening the patriarchal dynamics within this refugee camp. So then I said, well, wow. So we're on a roll here. So I said, well, what is the most feminized part of Oxfam? That took really long. Finally, a woman, you can just see her, a woman about the second row said, peace education. Peace education. And I said, well, and everyone else said, oh yeah. I said, how can you tell it's feminized? She said, well, almost everybody in the peace education is a woman, right? But that doesn't make for feminization by itself, right? Margaret Thatcher could do it, it's not feminized. So they said, no, that's not the real criteria. It's that it's not taken seriously. If there's anything that can be underfunded, definitely peace education. If there's anything that never gets the Land Rover, it's peace education, right? If it's anything that's not considered highly demanding, authoritative, and urgent, it is peace education. So watch what masculinization and feminization has done to a terrific and amongst the world's better humanitarian aid organizations. It has furthered and deepened and spread the impacts of patriarchy. And in the meantime, of course, it has meant that peace education doesn't get much attention. So, here's what I would suggest. Take whatever organization you know and don't necessarily love best. And I mean, take your family. I mean, take your college or university. I mean, take your program. Take an NGO that you're doing an internship with. And do a trial run. Try and do a gender analysis of the organization. And don't take too big a one to start with. Take one where you can really get the nuances. Count, always count, but don't just count. Listen, exactly what Nadine said. Listen to the use of language. Watch who is taken seriously. And really see if you can develop your own gender analytical skills. And then, maybe, you or I can be of any use to anyone else who needs our gender analytical skills. Thanks a lot.
What experiences, maybe some successful ones, could you give us some hope about regarding attitudinal change? We know the horrors of using women as victims, as pawns in war. We know about that. So on the ground, are there any experiences of education and attitudinal change for men and women both?
I was about to take a piece of paper and write it down, but okay, let me answer to that question. In peacekeeping operation, we don't do that much education and attitude change. I mean, also maybe we do without knowing it. What we're trying to do in the different peacekeeping operation we have, there is a gender unit, right, with a senior gender advisor. And we are trying, I think, the most difficult part is to mainstream gender, and everybody understand what it means, gender mainstreaming in this crowd, right? And if you take a peacekeeping operation, especially the multi-dimensional peacekeeping operation of today, it's not only the military force or the police, you have a big civilian component. You have the electoral division, you have the political affairs, you have the human rights, child protection. So I think the gender advisor has to really help the different colleagues to integrate gender in their relevant activities. For instance, when you organize election in country X, you ensure that both men and women can participate as voters and candidates. And in Haiti, we did a lot of voters education involving also the women and training female candidates because they had less means than the men candidate. They were never invited to any meeting or any radio program because, of course, you invite the most obvious actors within the society. So I think we are slowly helping to change the way, the attitudes and the behavior in post-conflict, trying not to rebuild the country as it was before, because there is a tendency to go back to the status quo antebellum, and maybe women don't want to go back to that status quo because it was discriminatory to them, right? So I would say the positive example I can give you are mainly part of the programs and activities where we're trying to bring the voices of women to the table. But before I forget, I would like to add something to what Cynthia said. Very often we don't pay attention to the way we are reproducing the sexual division of labor in post-conflict environment. Because I've seen when I was in Senegal working with the Red Cross, the men were hired to build, like your water boys, to build some, participate in some project building schools or different infrastructure, and they were paid, okay? They were paid labor. And the women were asked to provide the water and the food to the men every day, but they were not paid. It was voluntary work. So this made me think that, but that's exactly what we expect women would do. At the household, they will cook and take care of the family and the men, but outside the household, they were really taken for granted that, it was taken for granted that they would provide the assistance to the men who were working. And then the head of the project, the Red Cross worker, said, we're gonna have a big celebration for this project and we invite the entire community. And I turned to him and I said, and who will cook? And he said, but the women, of course, will cook for the community. And it's like that all the time. So that's why you have to be extremely vigilant and pay attention to who is doing what. And you will see, if you take any situation post-conflict, that there is I would say, a replication of the sexual division of labor that you may have in time of peace. Do you want to add something?
Hi, I'm Gia. I'm a senior at Wellesley College. We actually just came from a gender and conflict class right before this, and we've been talking a lot about like insider-outsider relationships and that whole play and power, and we were wondering, or I was wondering more, how do you negotiate like dealing with traditions that are so deeply embedded in society and kind of talking about gender in a respectful manner, and how like do you even engage in these conversations, because you can come in and like live in a community, but I feel like at the same time you'll never be completely an insider, and how do you like kind of negotiate that power balance? And also I have a second question. So Nadine, you were talking about like the short-term solutions versus like the long-term effects. And I mean, ideally in like peace theory and stuff, we always talk about like positive peace, right? Like long-term sustainable peace. But how do you put that as a priority when there's such like immediate needs to be met? Like, can there ever be a balance between like short-term solutions while that promote positive long-term sustainable peace?
And respect. I think one always has to be really careful. Well, first of all, the outsider always has their own traditions, right? It's not the people, as they say, the local people, who have traditions, and all the rest of us, free as a bird, never had a tradition in my life, right? And there is that kind of hierarchical assumption, isn't there? is that local people, by the very character of their localness, they are burdened by traditions. And that usually means irrational, pre-modern, unhelpful, patriarchal traditions. And we, coming in, by jet usually, from the outside, we are unburdened with traditions. And that kind of, and I don't mean you ever would do that, I really don't mean, because you're much more conscious, but there is that kind of easy, supercilious kind of assumption that really needs to be thought about well. It is much more going to be trying to be helpful, and I'm not of this community. I have traditions, and you here in this community, you have traditions. And so let's see what the purpose is that we are going to commonly work for. The second thing that doesn't answer everything, but it's one thing to kind of loosen things up a little bit and try to dismantle a bit the presumed authority that comes from being the outsider, traditionless, tradition-free person. But the second thing, I think, is never to assume that everybody in any community, anywhere, is monolithically in favor of or benefits from the traditions. Every society is got histories of contest. So you nodding your head, right? I mean, there are always contradictions. There are always contests. There are always disagreements. There's not a society on this teeny tiny planet that doesn't have dominant traditions and then contesting of those dominant traditions. And once one opens that up, one doesn't just always imagine that tradition, capital T usually, is monolithic, and to raise questions about its workings, about who benefits from it, about whether there are alternatives, is disrespectful. As soon as you realize, and yet that means you have to be curious about it and find out something. As soon as you realize that there are lots of different kinds of marriages that have gone on for years in this local community, that there have been lots of different ways to be a boy in this local community, that there have been lots of different ways for women to negotiate their lack of property rights in this community. That kind of opens things up a bit, and it means that there is a possibility that in fact there is an alternative stream within the community's ongoing fluid culture that can be tapped. And that's really different than I've just flown in from Geneva to tell your monolithic community to chuck it, right? And so I really, but it does mean one's got to be genuinely curious about the history and the multi-threaded quality of any local community that you're dealing with. They're always more complex, more contested than we imagine. Any village study will tell you that.
Yeah, to add on what you were saying, to jump on what you were saying, I'll give you an example of the danger of not really paying attention to the cultures in the country you're walking in and the traditions. In Nepal, for instance, in some areas of the country, in some communities, a woman who lost her husband, become a widow, she will be inherited, and I say inherited like a property or good, by the younger brother of the deceased, right? So the brilliant Red Cross workers, who used to be my colleagues, they saw that, the poor woman, she's a widow, she has been inherited by her family-in-law, and we have to liberate her from that. So they decided to give her access to income-generating projects so she could be completely independent, right? I mean, that's a brilliant idea. But this, outside the context of the community, put the woman in a very, very difficult situation, because then she was threatened by the family-in-law. There was a lot of pressure on her to share the income, and her life was really miserable. So maybe one of the ideas to help, again, I mean, be careful. I know sometimes I'm using words I don't like, but maybe for better words, right? To maybe assist the widow, the idea would be to assist also the family-in-law. And so everybody can have access to a little bit of assistance, what they need really concretely, instead of, again, bringing our own ideas of what that woman needs, thinking that it's going to be good for her if she can be independent. I'm not saying it's good for her to be inherited as a good by the family-in-law, and maybe there are more work to do to change the laws of the country so women can inherit when the husband died. But it's just an example that we arrive on mission with a lot of preconceived ideas about what people need, and I think that's something that we should be more careful about. To answer your question quickly, the second part, the short-term, long-term, for peacekeeping, it's a real dilemma, because we are supposed to be short-term, right? We arrive, conflict, post-conflict environment, emergency, trying to bring peace, keep peace, whatever. And we're not supposed to stay, but we have a 6-month mandate that is renewed, and then you can stay 10 years in the country. So we're always working on short-term programs and activities, and that's the problem, because you can never really work on any sustainable project. That's the role of UN agencies, like the UN development agencies, or UN Women, or UNFPA, other agencies that should take over. And there is a big gap, I think, from peacekeeping to peace-building activities, right? That's why if we are always on the short term, we have only the solutions I mentioned in my presentation. Arrive in a village, do some physical protection so the woman can go to the market, and that's it, right? But there is never a kind of long-term perspective where you can really involve the people in the search for solution. That's why I think we have a tendency, especially the humanitarian organization, to over-assist the people and the local people. I mean, if we're talking about, paying attention to language. I'm a local people from France, right? That's what we would say, right? Yeah, okay, so it's just a question of not involving enough the men and the women in the country of mission for the search of solution, and investing in their own skills and capacities in the long term.
Hi. Thank you so much, Nadine and Cynthia, for such inspiring talk. I'm Jane Parpart. I'm one of the new professors in the new PhD program in human security and global governance. And I teach a course. We have a full-time course next term on gender and human security, but I'm teaching plain old human security this fall, and I realized that my syllabus is littered with feminists. And I finally looked at the students, I said, this isn't just because this is all I do, it's because these are the most subversive, best, most critically analytical articles that exist on taking apart this human security, which has security and development with their sort of gendered tensions in them. And so we're trying to do that. But I have two questions. The first is, Nadine, you spoke about domestic violence, and you were speaking mostly about women and children, but there also is violence against young men and men who, especially men who in some way subvert the patriarchy. And it seems to me that that's also something we really need to talk about. And so that's one question. The other question is, I have a long-standing interest in the way in which, in Africa in particular, after nationalist struggles, there's been a very strong discourse about the need for women's advancement and gender equality, along with certain rules put in place in certain institutions, and over this has failed and is wound up being a very patriarchal states with gutting of the women's institutions and even gutting of laws that are supposed to improve women's lives. It seems to me that we need to look at and this is one of my projects in my mind, that just like your reaction to it. It seems to me we need to look at the gendered notions embedded in imagined peace. In other words, in the period of conflict, when people are talking about the future, how is it gendered? And as an example, in Canada and the US during World War II, women, Rosie the Riveter was a heroine. Everyone were talking about the new woman who was saving the world. But the imagined peace was Rosie back in home with the 2 kitties and the dog, and the husband back with a job. And it was an imagined peace that was very unequal and very patriarchal. But we never put that until that wonderful book, Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, that actually put that all together. So my question is, how, well, these are the questions, and I'd like your thoughts on them.
So I just want to kind of finish her thought here. And that is, always take homophobia seriously. Right? Because Jane was suggesting that there are different ways in which men can reimagine manliness in a way that is seen as very threatening by other men. And even threatening to, quote, the nation. The nation as built on and fostering very particular kinds of manliness and very particular kinds of womanhood. That's why so many feminists in so many countries are so critical of nationalism. Even those women who in fact have come into political activism through their taking part in nationalist movements, they, if they become feminists, become very critical of nationalism. What has been less talked about, more talked about now in Uganda, a lot, where homophobia is now rife, and backed by the government. But also in South Africa, where the gay men's movement was so integral to the anti-apartheid movement. So in Uganda now, in South Africa, particularly in the 1990s, there has been a lot of discussion of the ways in which homophobia directed towards men who refuse to conform to particular sorts of nationalized masculinity become the targets of discrimination and outright violence. And it does mean that to be serious about the patriarchal character of nation building, one has to be serious about homophobia. It works differently towards women than it does towards men. Lesbians are considered traitors because they refuse supposedly to be mothers, which of course isn't true. But men are seen as traitors because they refuse to stand up for a certain kind of manly nationhood. So take homophobia seriously, contemporarily, and watch for the international dynamics of homophobia. As many of you know, because you follow Ugandan politics, one of the most insidious international dynamics in Uganda is American evangelical white Protestants preaching of homophobia in Uganda, with a lot of money behind it from the United States. And that has then reinforced the homophobia of local Ugandan homophobes. So there is the international politics of homophobia. And it's just really something to think about a lot. I would just say, hooray for Jane's course on gender and security, and be sure, and if you have the chance, take it next semester.
The one, just to dwell quickly on the issue of violence against men, that's true, violence against men exists. I mean, my point is not to undermine that, but just to tell you that in the conflict, post-conflict, as you know, women are the majority of victims, right? And the atrocity they went through in Liberia, Congo, I think needs a solution, and needs a solution now. So that's why most of the resources have been really focusing on how to maybe prevent sexual violence rape from happening, but also providing services to those women. And I think that by helping the women, you help also the men somehow. And in the listening houses we have in the Congo, we find out also that more and more men were coming to those houses to find some comfort and talk about what happened to them, men victims of sexual violence. And we had male Congolese psychosocial workers to deal with those cases, but they were not the majority. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but it means that I think we have to take care of what is really seen as a big emergency and to repair the social fabric of society through helping the women.
Hello.
It both warms my heart and breaks my heart that there is so much interest in so little time. It is the perfect illustration that institutions need a lot more opportunities for people to learn gender analysis skills. We are going to have to stop soon, so what I want to ask is if the next two of you could try a 30-second question each. Okay, and if you can do that, honey, you can do a 30-second question too. We'll give you each a moment to wrap up. Yep. Okay.
Take them all together and then maybe they can respond?
Yeah, right, we'll try them all together.
All right, hi. So I had a question. I've noticed, I'm Leah. I'm a first year from Wellesley. Hi, so I was just wondering, I've seen sometimes in the general public or just some people, there's awareness in the general public of general gender issues, gender equality, in terms of jobs, but it sometimes seems like people just think, oh, well, we're fixing that gender problem. They don't look at the underlying idea and they kind of dismiss it. So I was just wondering, do they dismiss it because there are these kind of outwardly general things like gender equality in jobs, and is there a way to fix that? I was wondering how you both would define the terms masculine and feminine. Great. Okay. Hi, I'm Tanya Henderson. Thank you, Nadine and Cynthia. I wanted to talk a little bit about the possible masculinization of 1325 and the role of women in peace building now that it's being seen as a national security issue, particularly under the U.S. NAP, National Action Plan.
Hi, so I'm Cynthia Solari, and I'm faculty in the sociology department, and I spent about an hour with a student from my social gender class who's distraught because she's a social major and a women's studies minor and thinks she has no skills. So your talk was inspiring. So what I want to ask is, Nadine, how does one become the senior gender advisor to the United Nations? And if you could help me think about how to better advise students about the different pathways to this field. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Madupe Oshikoya. Hello, my name is Madupe Oshikoya. I'm a PhD student on the new program, Global Governance and Human Security, here at UMass. My question is for you, Nadine. You said that the most demobilization programs in post-conflict situations... Sorry. Right into it. Oh, sorry. Sorry. You said that most demobilization programs in post-conflict situations focus on men and boys. I was wondering, how many female ex-combatants have you come across, and what current programs are there to specifically focus on female and reintegrate them back into their communities?
Hi, my name is Adeline. I'm a first year at Wellesley. One question that I had came from a class that I had this afternoon, actually, about socially constructed realities. So essentially, mankind is full of socially constructed realities, essentially things that they believe to be true. However, they have no reason as to why they think that this, something is true and where that truth came from. So my question is directed at the idea of how feminized things are seen as less important or less urgent. And obviously that's not the case. However, it could be widely believed in society today that that's the case. So my question is, what can we do to make feminization and feminized things to be viewed as more important or more socially relevant for the future, and as important as masculinized things are in today's society?
My name is Celia Garcia. I'm a PhD candidate in public policy here in UMass. And my question to Nadine is about women with disability. Do you have any program that deal with women with disabilities? Because as we know, they suffer multiple discrimination in many areas: race, gender, poverty. So I'd like to know what the UN and especially peacekeeping operation in your department does.
Oh, easy. I'm so glad you decided on the easy ones for the last. So let me kind of merge several things together. First of all, masculinity and femininity. I mean, it really is in your head, right? That's where masculinity and femininity reside, right? That doesn't mean that it's lesser. It means it's harder to root it out. But it also means that one can listen really carefully to the assumptions we make and why those assumptions feel so comfortable and rewarding. Femininity is, and it can be really different in different countries and in different times in the same country. Femininity is any sets of behaviors or ways of being that are imagined to be appropriate to people who are seen as female. So, to talk about femininity is to talk about what is imagined to be either natural or appropriate. Appropriate's value, natural is supposedly belief. That's the way the world is. Attached to people who are imagined to be female. You can feminize anything or masculinize anything by taking those qualities and attaching them to a particular course, to a particular career, to a particular way of dressing, to a particular mode of speech. That is why masculinities, plural, and femininities are so powerful, because they're attachable to so many things, and you have to watch them over time. And that's why they're so contested, and they've been contested forever. Not always. That is, I wasn't contradicting myself. That is so femininity and masculinity are a set of presumed appropriate behaviors or ideas or ways of being that are supposedly natural to or should be appropriate to a person who is female. And masculinity, the same for somebody who's allegedly male. How do you change those? How do you change those? How do you get things that are dismissed as merely feminized and accord them more seriousness? Well, first of all, we have to dismantle patriarchy. Then the next step, that's Monday, then on Tuesday. But what you have to do is, first of all, challenge the presumption that things that are feminized are less serious, that are less demanding, are less technical, are less skilled. I remember when I grew up on Long Island. That's pointing towards Long Island. I grew up on Long Island in New York, and I went to Manhasset Public High School, and in junior high, it was required that the boys took shop. That's where they got to build things and repair cars and do all that. And the girls, us, we had to take home economics. This is about why skill is socially constructed. And So one of the things you had to do to get out of junior high school was be able to make a, can you believe it, board skirt, tux. Well, of course, I was hopeless, but the thing is, so was my mother, right? And so it took three of my mother's suburban friends to get me through. Now, allegedly, as a girl in junior high, this should have come to me absolutely natural. It is one of the reasons that women working in garment factories are paid so badly, because it's imagined that people who are female naturally know how to sew. And if anything is natural, then it's not a skill. And if it's not a skill, you don't have to pay people for it. So, to raise the seriousness of things that are feminized, you have to challenge seriousness, who gets to accord it. You have to challenge the notion of skill. You have to challenge the notion of value and necessity. But you could do it. More importantly is to dismantle the feminization and masculinization of men. And really ask, so why is that presumed to be so masculine? Why is that presumed to be so feminine? Which ministry, which department of the American government has never ever had a woman as secretary? Defense and the Treasury. And the Treasury, right? So challenge every kind of convention according masculinization or feminization to anything, and at the same time dismantle the hierarchy between them. Your question, which I haven't forgotten, is that why do people fragment things? That is, they'll take on gender inequality in jobs. Actually, they don't take it on very well, but they'll take it on, but they will not then carry that over and see that has something to do with foreign policy as well. I think most of us are much more comfortable with fragmentation because it limits our responsibilities. It limits our tasks. It limits the demands on us. So what you have to do is you have to have more stamina, more energy, and always show the dots between them, but be able to talk about why the sexism in the workforce actually has something to do with sexism driving foreign policy. You could say, well, of course it does, but then you have to say, okay, so how?
Okay, one point on masculinity and femininity. I think, have you also noticed how the feminization of peace is leading to the masculinization of war, right? Why do you think that women organization and women themselves, mobilized at the grassroots level, doing peace work, peace building, are not taken seriously? And that's another discussion for another day, but we find very few women who manage to reach the formal peace negotiation table. And again, when we were in San Diego with all these women peacemakers, they're doing an incredible work, but this work is not known by the decision makers at the United Nations. And we should document what they're doing, but it's considered as not serious. It's a peace work that has no real consequences on issues of peace and security, right? And I don't know if you've seen the documentary called Pray the Devil Back to Hell, on the struggle of the Western African women for the peace process. And you remember the women from Liberia, when they were trying to get access to the peace process and they were never invited, so they just decided to go by themselves and to sit down in the corridor where the peace talks were held and try to block the passage so the men couldn't get out of the conference until they reached an agreement for peace. And they were never taken seriously until they decided to really move on and block the process, right? But very often women are not invited to peace processes, or they're invited as observers. They don't have a seat at the peace negotiation table. And I think it has to do because peace is so feminized that it's not considered as very important. So the work that these women are doing at the grassroots level will never be taken into consideration for the formal and official peace negotiation. And this is something that need to be changed, but it's difficult to change that. Why? Because who are the special envoy, the mediator, who try to negotiate with the parties to a conflict? Who are they? The men, again, we were talking about the men who have so many years experience in diplomacy, international relations, and we don't consider the women at the grassroots level, who I think could do a better job, even because they have this training at the grassroots level, but it's not for all the reasons we mentioned earlier. They are not invited because we think that it's not their place to sit at the peace negotiation table, right? So again, I've seen that very often in peacekeeping operation. The peacekeepers, they are living in this very strong, hyper-masculine environment when you have this hegemonic masculinity, right? So they really want to stick to masculine activities, especially the military, right? So everything that is related to peace is undermined and left to the civilians and the women organization, right? There was the question on the agenda, the Women, Peace and Security 1325. It's true that now everybody has a national action plan, the military, the different organizations. NATO has a national action plan on 1325 and they try to implement. But my experience is that I've seen for a lot of military organizations, there is a confusion between, they don't really understand 1325, and there is a confusion between gender mainstreaming and getting more women. And for them, I think it's a question of getting more women as military, getting more women as peacekeepers. And this is really, how could I say, we are losing a little bit the substance of the debate now because we are focusing too much on numbers. And in peacekeeping, the military, they don't really understand gender-related issues. When you are dealing with military, you need to be extremely pragmatic and very operational. So you need to explain and justify why you need women peacekeepers, for instance, and why do we need to integrate a gender perspective, because a rights-based approach doesn't work. And that's why I end up promoting a very essentialist way of integrating gender, because we're saying, oh, we need more women peacemakers because they are better at this. They are better at reaching out to other women. I'm not convinced, but that's the only way I can really make the military move on gender-related issues, right? That's it. The disability, yeah, of course. I think NGOs or other UN agencies have proper programs and activities for women with disabilities, right? Peacekeeping doesn't really go into that particular field, but I can tell you something in particular. I've seen how difficult it is in Haiti after the earthquake, when so many young women and men were maimed after the earthquake, and they lost a leg and they lost the arm, and the Handicap International, do you know this NGO, this French NGO, is providing prostheses and is, in growing up with this handicap. But of course, for the woman, the young woman, it's even more difficult than the boys, because in a very traditional society like Haiti, there is an expectation for the girls to get married one day, right? And in other society, the same traditional value. And for a woman who has been maimed, I mean a young woman who lost a arm, a leg, and is not, what I've heard said, a whole woman, a complete woman, it would be a nightmare. She will be assisted by her family, or maybe not, but she has no chance to be really socially integrated, right? And for the women who have no economic means, it means they won't be, the young women, they won't be able even to change the prostheses as they grow up, and they're going to be completely marginalized, right? And there was really an aspect of understanding the local context, again, what it means for a young woman to live with that handicap and how to better assist them.
And also because during wars and in times of disasters, people with disabilities, and especially women, are the most affected. They're the most disadvantaged.
Yeah, the most because of the expectations at the society about their roles and what they're supposed to do and represent at the society level. That's why maybe your organization don't pay enough attention to those disabilities, except when there is a big natural disaster like in Haiti, and you have a majority of the population affected, and they have handicaps, and you need to really take care of that. But the problem is that there is no gender perspective applied, and we're going to take care of the boys and the girls in the same way, and maybe the boys has better chance to be reintegrated than the girls, right? So that's a very good point, thank you. And how I became a gender advisor, I don't think I have time to answer, but I can answer individually to the person, because it's, I don't think we have time, it's a long story, right?
So now that we are all much smarter and much more curious, please join me in thanking our speakers.